Chapter 1. Arrival at the Ivy Manor. The English countryside stretched endlessly before us as the motor car wound its way through narrow lanes, the hedgerows on either side standing like silent sentinels. It was late autumn, and the air carried a crispness that spoke of winter's approach. I, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat beside my old friend Hercule Poirot, who, as ever, was immaculately dressed in a dark suit, his moustache waxed to perfection. His eyes, sharp and cat-like, darted about, taking in every detail of our surroundings. We were bound for Ivy Manor, a grand Victorian estate nestled deep in the heart of the countryside. The invitation had come from its owner, Mr. Charles Montague, a gentleman of some repute, though I confess I knew little of him beyond his reputation for hosting lavish gatherings. Poirot had been summoned to investigate the disappearance of a silver cigarette case. A trifling matter, or so it seemed. Yet, as I had learned over the years, with Poirot, nothing was ever quite as it appeared. "I say, Poirot," I ventured, breaking the comfortable silence, "this seems rather beneath your talents. A missing cigarette case? Surely the local constabulary could handle such a thing." Poirot turned to me, his eyes twinkling with that familiar gleam. "Ah, mon ami, you underestimate the complexity of human nature. A theft, however small, is often the thread that unravels a much larger tapestry. Besides, our host's urgency was most intriguing. There is, I suspect, more to this than meets the eye." I nodded, though I remained unconvinced. Still, I trusted Poirot's instincts. If he sensed something amiss, it was likely there was. At last the motor car turned onto a long gravel driveway, and Ivy Manor came into view. It was an imposing structure, its stone walls draped in thick ivy that seemed to cling to every crevice. Tall chimneys rose from the roof, their silhouettes stark against the overcast sky. The gardens, though meticulously kept, were shrouded in a thin mist that curled around the hedges and flower beds, lending the place an air of mystery. Beyond the manor, a secluded lake glimmered faintly, its surface still as glass, while dense woods encircled the estate, isolating it from the outside world. "Quite the place, isn't it?" I remarked, gazing up at the manor's towering facade. Poirot, however, was not one for idle admiration. "Oui, Hastings. But observe the ivy. It grows unchecked in places. A sign, perhaps, that all is not as orderly as it seems." Before I could respond, the front door swung open, and a figure emerged to greet us. Charles Montague was a man of middle age, perhaps in his late 40s, with a lean, aristocratic face and hair that had begun to silver at the temples. His attire was impeccable, yet there was a distracted air about him, as though his thoughts were elsewhere. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome to Ivy Manor," he said, extending a hand. His voice was smooth, almost theatrical, but his smile did not quite reach his eyes. "I trust your journey was pleasant?" "Most pleasant, Monsieur Montague," Poirot replied, shaking his hand with a slight bow. "Though I must confess, the fog, it adds a certain atmosphere, does it not?" Montague chuckled, though it seemed forced. "Ah, yes, the English weather. One must learn to live with it, I suppose. Do come in. The others are eager to meet you." We followed him into the manor's grand entrance hall, where the opulence of the interior immediately struck me. Polished wood gleamed underfoot, and Persian rugs softened our steps. A crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling, casting a warm glow over the space. Yet, for all its luxury, there was an undeniable tension in the air, a sense that the manor's inhabitants were not entirely at ease. Waiting to greet us was a thin, nervous-looking man in his 30s, who hovered at Montague's side like a shadow. "This is Mr. Reginald Thornton, my cousin and secretary," Montague introduced. "He manages the affairs of the estate." Thornton offered a stiff nod, his eyes darting between Poirot and me. "A pleasure, gentlemen," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. There was something guarded about him, as though Poirot's presence unsettled him deeply. Poirot, ever observant, smiled politely. "Monsieur Thornton, it is an honor." We were then led into the drawing-room, where the household had gathered. The room was a picture of elegance, with velvet sofas arranged around a grand fireplace and a gramophone playing softly in the corner. Seated within were the guests. Colonel Hargreaves, a retired military officer with a ruddy complexion and a booming laugh, was an old acquaintance of the Montague family. However, his jovial demeanour masked a lingering resentment towards Charles's brother, Arthur Montague, stemming from a military scandal years ago that had cost the colonel a promotion and left his reputation tarnished. Lady Penelope, a wealthy widow in her 50s, was known for her sharp wit and even sharper curiosity. Her presence at Ivy Manor was no mere social call. She had invested heavily in Charles Montague's business ventures, and rumours swirled that she had also covered some of Arthur's substantial gambling debts, a fact that tied her fortunes to the family's in ways few understood. Miss Eleanor, a young woman of perhaps 25, sat quietly, her gaze distant and watchful. She was no stranger to the Montagues. Years ago, she had been engaged to Charles's brother, but their relationship had ended bitterly, leaving her with secrets she dared not share, and a heart still shadowed by the past. "Colonel Hargreaves, Lady Penelope, Miss Eleanor," Montague announced, "may I present Mr. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings." The colonel rose to his feet, extending a hand. "Heard of you, Poirot. Solved some devilish cases, haven't you? Glad to have you here, though I can't imagine what old Charles needs you for. A missing trinket, I hear." Lady Penelope leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, but it's not just any trinket, Colonel. It's a Montague heirloom, isn't it, Charles? Quite valuable, I'd wager, and tied to family secrets, no doubt." Montague shifted uncomfortably. "Well, yes, but I'm sure it's nothing more than a misplacement. Still, one can't be too careful." Miss Eleanor said nothing, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup as she stared into the fire, her silence heavy with unspoken history. The servants, too, made their presence known. Jenkins, the butler, stood rigidly by the door, his face a mask of professionalism, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured tea. Molly, the young maid, flitted about the room, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She caught my gaze and offered a small, knowing smile, which I returned somewhat awkwardly. Poirot, meanwhile, had taken a seat near the fire, his eyes roving over the room with keen interest. "A most charming manner, Monsieur Montague," he remarked, "though I cannot help but notice a certain tension among your guests." Montague laughed, though it was a hollow sound. "Oh, it's nothing, I assure you. Just the usual ebb and flow of a country house weekend." Poirot's moustache twitched slightly, a sign that he was not entirely convinced. "Perhaps," he said, "but the little grey cells, they are already at work, n'est-ce pas?" I, for my part, was enchanted by the manor's grandeur. The rich tapestries, the gleaming silver, the faint scent of wood smoke from the hearth. Yet even I could not ignore the undercurrent of unease that seemed to permeate the room. Reginald Thornton, in particular, struck me as a man on edge, his eyes flitting toward Montague with every passing moment. It was over tea that the matter of the theft was finally broached. Montague, with a studied casualness, mentioned the missing cigarette case. "It's a small thing, really," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Probably misplaced by one of the servants. But I thought, why not have the best man for the job take a look?" Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And yet, monsieur, you have gone to the trouble of summoning me from London for this small thing. Is there, perhaps, more to this theft than you are letting on?" Montague hesitated, his fingers drumming lightly on the arm of his chair. "Well, I suppose it is a family heirloom. and I'd hate to think it lost forever. But truly I'm sure it will turn up." Poirot nodded, though I could tell he was not satisfied. "Of course," he said smoothly. "I shall do my utmost to recover it." As the evening wore on, the group began to retire for the night. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows like a living thing. Poirot and I were shown to our rooms by Jenkins, who seemed eager to escape our presence as quickly as possible. Once alone, Poirot turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "What do you make of it, Hastings?" I shrugged. "Seems like a lot of fuss over a cigarette case, if you ask me. But I suppose Montague has his reasons." Poirot smiled faintly. "Ah, but what are those reasons, mon ami? That is the question. And why does our host seem so distracted? Why does Monsieur Thornton watch him like a hawk? And what of the guests? Each with their own secrets, I suspect." I frowned. "You think there's more to this than a simple theft?" Poirot's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I am certain of it. There is more here than meets the eye, mon ami. Much more." With that, he bid me good night, leaving me to ponder the mysteries that lay ahead. Chapter 2. Arthur's Unexpected Arrival. The morning broke over Ivy Manor with a dull grey pallor, the fog pressing thickly against the mullioned windows as though reluctant to release its hold on the estate. I awoke to the patter of rain, a soft but persistent sound that seemed to underscore the stillness of the house. Hercule Poirot, ever the early riser, was already seated in the dining hall when I joined him, his small, neat figure a picture of composure amidst the grandeur of the room. The long mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier's light, its stern ancestral portraits gazing down upon us with silent disapproval. Charles Montague presided at the head, his fingers tapping an irregular rhythm on the cloth, a faint shadow of unease crossing his otherwise composed features. Beside him sat Reginald Thornton, his cousin and secretary, whose thin frame and pallid complexion suggested a man perpetually on edge. The air between them was taut, a strained politeness that Poirot's sharp eyes could not have failed to notice. Indeed, as he sipped his coffee, black of course, for he abhorred the English habit of milk, I caught the faintest twitch of his moustache, a sure sign that his little grey cells were already at work. Colonel Hargreaves, seated opposite, was in fine form, his voice cutting through the morning quiet like a bugle. And there I was, lads, in the thick of it. Burma, 1898, facing down a band of rebels with nothing but my wits and a rusty bayonet. Took a shot at me, they did, but I ducked just in time and, well, suffice to say, I gave 'em what for. He guffawed, slapping the table with a meaty hand. Lady Penelope, ever eager for a conversational opening, turned her bright eyes toward Miss Eleanor, who sat at the table's far end, her demeanour as reserved as her grey frock. "Really, Colonel, must we have war at breakfast? I'm far more curious about Miss Eleanor's tales. Where did you say you hailed from, my dear?" Miss Eleanor's fingers paused on her teacup, her gaze fixed downward. "I didn't," she replied, her voice clipped, a wall of ice against Lady Penelope's probing warmth. The widow's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Before further pleasantries could be exchanged, a sharp knock resounded through the hall, reverberating off the panelled walls. Jenkins, the butler, hastened to the door, his steps betraying a flicker of alarm. He returned moments later, his face ashen, his voice unsteady. "Mr. Arthur Montague, sir," he announced, stepping aside. A figure strode into the room with the force of a tempest, uninvited and unabashed. Arthur Montague was a man of rough edges, his jaw shadowed with stubble, his coat creased and travel-worn, his dark eyes burning with a ferocity that stood in stark contrast to Charles's polished refinement. The brothers could not have been more dissimilar. Where Charles was the gentleman of leisure, Arthur was the vagabond, a storm breaking upon the manor's calm. "Charles," Arthur said, his voice a low growl. "I need a word." "Alone." Charles rose, his face drained of colour, a tremor passing through his hands. "Arthur?" he murmured, as though the name itself were a shock. "Yes, of course. The library, then." He glanced at Reginald, who stood without hesitation, his loyalty as automatic as it was unspoken. "Reginald will join us." The trio departed, leaving the dining room in a ripple of whispers. Lady Penelope leaned forward, her voice a conspiratorial hush. "Well now, the black sheep returns. I've heard whispers of Arthur Montague. Gambling debts are falling out years ago. What do you suppose he wants?" Colonel Hargreaves snorted. "Trouble, mark my words. Always was a loose cannon, that one." I glanced at Miss Eleanor, whose grip on her teacup had tightened, her knuckles whitening against the porcelain. She said nothing, but her silence spoke volumes. Beside me, Poirot remained still, his expression inscrutable, though I knew his mind was racing. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" I asked under my breath. He tilted his head, his voice a murmur. "Most curious, Hastings. The arrival of Monsieur Arthur, it is a pebble dropped into still water. The ripples, they will reveal much." Rising with a casual air, he beckoned me to follow. "Come, mon ami. A little stroll, perhaps, to aid the digestion." We slipped from the room and positioned ourselves near the library door, where raised voices soon reached our ears. "You stole my life, Charles." Arthur's tone was raw, accusatory. "Everything I had, everything I was, you took it. And now you sit here playing Lord of the Manor. I'll see you exposed for the fraud you are." Charles's reply was shaky, defensive. "You don't understand, Arthur. It wasn't like that. I had no choice." "No choice?" Arthur laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You chose betrayal, and I'll make sure everyone knows it." Reginald's voice cut in, steady but insistent. "Arthur, enough. This isn't the place. Leave now, and we'll sort this privately." "Privately?" Arthur sneered. "With that detective sniffing about? I'm not the fool here." The door burst open, and Arthur stormed past us, his shoulder brushing mine as he made for the front entrance. The slam of the door echoed through the manor, a thunderous punctuation to his exit. Charles emerged moments later, his hair dishevelled, his eyes wild. "A family misunderstanding," he muttered, avoiding our gaze. "Nothing to concern yourselves with, gentlemen." He retreated upstairs, Reginald trailing behind like a shadow. Poirot watched them go, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "A misunderstanding," he says, he mused. Yet the fear in his eyes, it tells a different tale. Why does the arrival of Monsieur Arthur provoke such terror, I wonder? I frowned. "Do you think it's tied to the cigarette case?" Poirot's lips curved faintly. "The cigarette case, Hastings, is but a trifle, a distraction perhaps from a secret far more profound. No, this is a matter of the heart, of the past. We shall see." After the morning's excitement, the day at Ivy Manor settled into a semblance of routine, though the undercurrent of tension remained palpable. Poirot, ever the keen observer, suggested a walk through the estate's grounds, ostensibly to admire the gardens, but undoubtedly to survey the lay of the land. I accompanied him, our footsteps crunching on the gravel paths, as we passed the mist-shrouded lake and the dense woods beyond. "The manor, it has many secrets, Hastings," Poirot remarked, his eyes scanning the horizon. "And secrets, they have a way of revealing themselves given time." We returned to the house to find the other guests engaged in their own pursuits. Colonel Hargreaves had taken to the billiard-room, his booming laughter echoing through the halls, while Lady Penelope had cornered Miss Eleanor in the drawing-room, her relentless curiosity undeterred by the young woman's reticence. As the afternoon waned, the household gathered for tea, the ritual providing a veneer of normalcy. Yet the absence of Charles Montague, who had sequestered himself in his study with Reginald Thornton, was keenly felt. The conversation was stilted, the guests exchanging banalities, while their thoughts undoubtedly lingered on the morning's confrontation. Dinner that evening was a muted affair, the fog outside thickening into a shroud that seemed to seep into the manor itself. Charles was absent, pleading a headache, and Reginald fielded questions with practiced deflection, his answers smooth but empty. The guests ate in near silence, the clink of cutlery a stark counterpoint to the morning's drama. Afterward, Poirot stepped onto the terrace, his small figure silhouetted against the misty expanse of the lake. I joined him, the damp air chilling my skin. "What occupies your thoughts, Poirot?" I asked. He gazed out at the fog, his voice soft but resolute. "I think, Hastings, that we stand at the edge of a puzzle, a psychological puzzle, most intricate. The pieces, they are scattered, but they will come together. Of that I am certain." With that, he turned back to the house, leaving me to contemplate the shadows that loomed ever larger over Ivy Manor. Chapter 3. A Body in the Library. The morning descended upon Ivy Manor with a chill that seemed to seep through the very walls, the fog outside curling about the windows like a shroud reluctant to lift. I had risen early, the unease of the previous day lingering in my bones, and joined Hercule Poirot in the dining hall. He sat at the table's end, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly, his eyes bright with that peculiar alertness that marked his every waking hour. The room was silent, but for the faint clink of porcelain as Jenkins, the butler, moved among us, his face drawn with attention I could not yet fathom. Charles Montague presided over the gathering, though his usual theatrical flair was dimmed, his fingers restless upon the tablecloth. Reginald Thornton sat close, his thin frame hunched as though guarding some unspoken secret. The guests, Colonel Hargreaves, Lady Penelope and Miss Eleanor, partook of their breakfast with a subdued air, the shadow of Arthur Montague's abrupt arrival and departure still hanging over us all. It was Jenkins who broke the stillness, bursting into the room with a cry that sent a shiver through the assembled company. His face was ghastly pale, his voice a stammering wreck as he gasped, "Sir, Mr. Arthur, he's dead, sir, in the library. A bullet, his head, oh heavens!" A ripple of shock swept the room. Colonel Hargreaves rose halfway, his florid cheeks darkening with indignation. "Dead? By Jove, man, what's this nonsense?" Lady Penelope's hand fluttered to her bosom, her breath escaping in a theatrical gasp. "Arthur, oh, the horror of it!" Miss Eleanor, seated apart, turned a shade paler than her already wan complexion, her hands gripping the table's edge until her knuckles gleamed white. She uttered not a word, her silence more eloquent than any exclamation. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his calm authority cutting through the chaos. "Jenkins, lead me to him at once," he said, his tone unwavering. "Hastings, you will accompany me." We followed the butler through the echoing corridors, the sombre oak panelling seeming to close in around us. The library door stood ajar, and as we crossed the threshold, the sight within struck me with a cold dread. Arthur Montague lay slumped in a high-backed armchair, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, a crimson stain blooming across his shirt-front. A bullet lodged in his temple. His eyes stared blankly, his rugged features frozen in a grimace that might have been shock or defiance. But how had he returned? Only yesterday he had stormed from the manor, his departure as tempestuous as his arrival. Yet here he lay, lifeless, within these very walls. Poirot's sharp eyes darted about the room, and I followed his gaze to the floor near the library's entrance. There, half hidden by the rug, was a faint trail of mud, damp and fresh, as though someone had entered from the grounds not long before. A discarded cloak, sodden with rain, hung limply over a chair by the door, its presence suggesting that Arthur had indeed returned under cover of darkness, perhaps to continue his confrontation or to retrieve something left behind. Poirot approached the body with his usual precision, his keen gaze sweeping over every detail. "A single shot to the temple," he murmured, leaning close. "The blood, it is fresh. And yet, where is the weapon? Most curious, n'est-ce pas?" I surveyed the room, my pulse quickening. The library, so orderly the previous day, now bore signs of disarray. A heavy tome lay splayed upon the floor near Arthur's feet, its pages crumpled as though dropped in haste. The rug beneath was rucked up, suggesting a scuffle. The window, though shut fast and latched, bore no signs of tampering. The grand fireplace stood cold, its ashes undisturbed. Poirot's attention fixed upon the rug, where faint scuff marks marred the pile. "There was movement here," he said softly. "A struggle, perhaps." His eyes narrowed as they fell upon a muddy footprint near the bookshelf, its outline faint but unmistakable. And this, mud, fresh from the grounds, yet the window remains locked. How intriguing. Before I could offer a theory, Charles Montague appeared in the doorway, his face a mask of feigned astonishment. "Good Lord," he breathed, his voice trembling just enough to seem rehearsed. "Arthur, he must have done it himself. He was always so unstable, you know. After our row yesterday, I feared he might—" Poirot turned to him, his expression inscrutable. "You suggest suicide, Monsieur Montague?" Charles nodded, his eyes flickering nervously. Yes, it must be. He was distraught, unhinged even. What else could it be? Poirot's moustache quivered, a subtle sign of disbelief. "And yet," he said, "there is no gun. A man who shoots himself does not then hide the weapon, does he? And observe, the angle of the wound, it slopes upward. A self-inflicted shot would not be so. No, monsieur, this is no suicide." Charles's hands shook as he clasped them before him, his composure faltering. "But who would, here, in my own house?" "That," Poirot replied coolly, "is precisely what I shall uncover." He turned to Jenkins, who lingered by the door, wringing his hands. "Seal this room, Jenkins. No one enters without my express permission." Poirot's voice softened, his tone coaxing. "And tell me, Jenkins, did you hear anything unusual last night?" The butler's face crumpled, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. I don't know, sir. It's all a blur. I was in the servants' hall, and there was a noise, I think. Around midnight, a muffled thud, like something heavy dropping, but I thought it was just the house settling or the wind. I never imagined—" He broke off, his voice choking with horror. Poirot nodded, his mind clearly turning over the information. "Very well. You may go." As Jenkins retreated, Poirot resumed his scrutiny of the scene, his small, deliberate movements betraying the intensity of his focus. He knelt by the footprint, tracing its edges with a finger. "This mud," he murmured. "It is from outside, yes? Yet the window is secure. There is a puzzle here, Hastings." I frowned, my mind grappling with the implications. If not through the window, then how? Another entrance? Poirot's eyes gleamed with that familiar spark. "Perhaps, mon ami, or perhaps something more clever still." Poirot's gaze swept the room once more, his eyes alighting on a cushion that lay askew on the floor near the armchair. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. A small singed hole marred the fabric, and the faint scent of gunpowder lingered. "Ah," he murmured, "the killer, they were clever. They used this to muffle the shot, no doubt. A thud, not a bang, and so the household slept on." I stared at the cushion, marveling at his deduction. Brilliant, Poirot. That explains why no one came running. Précisément, he said, his eyes gleaming. The little grey cells, they do not rest. As Poirot examined the cushion, I recalled the previous night. Amid the howling wind and rattling windows, I had heard a faint thud, but in my half-sleep I had thought it nothing more than the house groaning under the storm's assault. Now I realized it must have been the muffled shot. Poirot, too, must have heard it, though he gave no sign of it at the time. Our musings were interrupted by the arrival of the local constabulary, a stout sergeant and his deputy, who bustled into the room with the air of men unaccustomed to such grim affairs. They took charge of the scene with a mixture of deference and bewilderment, securing the library and questioning the staff under Poirot's watchful eye. It was not until midday that Inspector Japp of Scotland Yard arrived, his sturdy frame filling the doorway, his expression a blend of irritation and reluctant fondness. "Japp!" I exclaimed, relieved to see a familiar face. "What brings you out here?" He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the scene with a practiced sweep. "Got word from the locals. Murder, they said, and a messy one at that. Took the first train down. Didn't reckon on you being in the thick of it, though, Poirot." Poirot smiled thinly. "A pleasure, as always, Inspector. And yes, a murder it is. Most intriguing, I assure you." Japp's gaze settled on Arthur's body, his brow creasing. "Looks like suicide to me. A shot to the head. We'll find the weapon soon enough." "Non, Poirot countered, shaking his head. "It is not so simple. The wound's angle, the absence of the weapon, the signs of struggle, these tell a different tale. An intruder, perhaps, or a scene arranged to deceive." Japp grunted, skepticism etched in his features, though a flicker of doubt crossed his eyes. "Always with the theories, eh? All right, what have you got?" Poirot gestured to the scuff marks and the footprint. "These, for a start, and the locked window, yet mud from the grounds. How did it come here, I wonder?" Japp crouched by the footprint, his manner grudgingly thoughtful. "Could be the killer slipped in and locked up after, or there's another way in we haven't spotted." "Précisément," Poirot agreed, "and we shall find it, you and I." With a curt nod, Japp addressed the constables hovering in the hall. "Right, boys, let's have at it. Search the grounds, look for that gun, and check every nook of this place. Hopkins, round up the staff for statements." As the men dispersed, Poirot and I withdrew to the drawing-room, where the household had been herded like sheep in a pen. The air was thick with unease. Reginald paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped tightly behind him. Lady Penelope perched on a sofa, her eyes alight with speculation. Miss Eleanor gazed out the window, her face a mask of quiet anguish. "Oh, Mr. Poirot!" Lady Penelope cried as we entered. "What a dreadful affair! Poor Arthur! Surely it was his own hand, driven by despair. Or perhaps that old Montague curse I've heard tell of." Poirot regarded her with a polite incline of his head. "Madame, I fear it is neither despair nor curse. It is murder." A collective gasp echoed through the room. Reginald halted mid-step, his face ashen. "Murder? But how? Why?" Poirot adjusted his pince-nez with a flourish, his voice ringing with certainty. "That, monsieur, is what I shall discover. For now, remain here. Inspector Japp will wish to speak with you all." He turned to me, his eyes sharp. "Come, Hastings. The library holds more secrets yet." As we returned to the scene, Japp overseeing the search, I could not shake the chill that gripped me. Poirot, however, was in his element, his mind already weaving the threads of this dark tapestry into order. Chapter 4. Questions and Clues. I must confess, the dining room of Ivy Manor had taken on an altogether different air since the grim discovery of Arthur Montague's body. The long mahogany table, gleaming under the chandelier's soft light, seemed less a symbol of grandeur now, and more a stage for the unfolding drama. The dining room, with its heavy oak panels and the faint scent of beeswax, seemed to close in around us, the air thick with unspoken suspicions. I stood beside Poirot, my old friend and the sharpest mind I've ever known, feeling the weight of the moment as he prepared to take charge. Poirot's small, neat figure stood at the head of the table, his green eyes glinting with that familiar intensity. Around us sat the household. Charles Montague, pale and fidgety, his fingers worrying the edge of his napkin. Reginald Thornton, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. Colonel Hargreaves, his ruddy face set in a scowl. Lady Penelope, her curiosity barely masked by decorum. Miss Eleanor lost in a world of her own sorrow. And the servants, Jenkins and Molly, hovering nervously at the edges. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice cutting through the tension like a finely honed blade. "The death of Monsieur Arthur Montague is a puzzle that demands our attention. I shall speak with each of you in turn, privately, to uncover the truth. We begin with Monsieur Charles Montague." A murmur rippled through the room, but no one dared object. Charles stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor, and followed Poirot to a small study off the dining room. I trailed behind, my pulse quickening with anticipation. The study was a snug little room, lined with books and heavy with the scent of leather and wood smoke. Poirot settled into an armchair, his posture as precise as ever, while Charles sat opposite, looking for all the world like a man facing a firing squad. "Monsieur Montague," Poirot said, his tone gentle, yet edged with purpose. "Pray, recount for me your last meeting with your brother." Charles swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the carpet. "It was yesterday morning in the library. We argued. He was in a temper, accusing me of things I'd rather not repeat. I tried to calm him, but he wouldn't listen. He stormed out and I went to my room early. That's all I know, I swear it." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache giving that faint twitch I've come to recognize as a sign of his mind at work. "These things he accused you of, what were they precisely?" Charles' eyes darted up, then away again, his fingers tugging at his sleeve. "Family matters, Mr. Poirot. Old quarrels, nothing more. It's not worth dredging up now, surely. Yet, monsieur, your brother's return after so many years suggests these family matters were of great significance," Poirot pressed, his voice smooth but insistent. "What exactly did he accuse you of? A betrayal, perhaps? A financial misdeed? Or something more personal?" Charles's jaw tightened, his voice barely above a whisper. He claimed I had stolen his inheritance, that I had cheated him out of what was rightfully his. But it's not true, I swear it. Our father's will was clear, and I've managed the estate as best I could. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet he returned to confront you. Did he threaten to take legal action, or was it something more immediate?" Charles's hands shook as he clasped them together. He said he would expose me, ruin my reputation, but I didn't. I couldn't." He broke off, his composure crumbling. Poirot leaned back, his gaze unrelenting. "And tell me, monsieur, why did you invite your guests this weekend? Was it merely for a social gathering, or was there another purpose?" Charles blinked, caught off guard. I wanted to celebrate the estate's prosperity, to show that all was well. But with Arthur's arrival, it all went to pieces." "And your guests? Do any of them have reason to wish harm upon your brother?" Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Charles's eyes widened. "No, of course not. They're friends, acquaintances. Why would they—" "Ah, but in matters of murder, one must consider all possibilities," Poirot interrupted. "For now you may return to the others." Charles rose, his relief evident in the slump of his shoulders, and hurried out. Poirot turned to me, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He conceals something, Hastings. His nerves. They betray him. I nodded, my mind buzzing. He was positively twitchy, Poirot. I'd wager that argument was more than a trifling spat. Do you think he's hiding something serious? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Indeed, mon ami. But what it is, and why, those are the questions we must answer. Next to enter was Reginald Thornton, Charles's cousin and secretary. He was a wiry fellow, with a thin face and hands that twitched like a cornered animal's. He sat only after a moment's pause, his eyes flicking toward the door as if hoping for an escape. Monsieur Thornton, Poirot began, his tone measured, you are most loyal to Monsieur Charles, are you not? Reginald straightened, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. He's a good man, Mr. Poirot. Arthur was the troublemaker, always stirring up mischief. Charles wouldn't hurt a fly. I'd stake my life on it. Poirot's eyebrow arched ever so slightly. Your loyalty is admirable, but tell me, monsieur, what is your role here at Ivy Manor? As secretary, you must be privy to many of the family's affairs. Reginald's fingers twitched. I manage the estate's accounts, handle correspondence, that sort of thing. It's a position of trust, and I take it seriously. And in that position, have you ever come across any irregularities? Perhaps something that might have angered Monsieur Arthur? Reginald's eyes darted away. No, nothing like that. The estate is in good order, thanks to Charles's management. Poirot leaned forward, his gaze piercing. And yet Monsieur Arthur returned with accusations of theft. Did he ever approach you about these matters? Reginald's face paled. He did mention something, but I told him it was nonsense. Charles is an honorable man. And your own relationship with Monsieur Arthur? Were you on good terms? Reginald hesitated. We were never close. He was always the wild one, causing trouble. I preferred to keep my distance. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And on the night of the murder, you say you were in your room, writing letters. Were these letters of a personal nature, or related to the estate? Reginald's hand stilled, though a faint quiver lingered in his fingers. Personal matters, Mr. Poirot. Family correspondence. I see, Poirot murmured. And you heard nothing unusual that night? No sounds from the library, perhaps? Reginald shook his head. Nothing, as I said. Just the usual creaks of the house and the wind. Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Thank you, monsieur. You may go. As Reginald left, Poirot turned to me, his voice low. His loyalty is a shield, Hastings, but for whom, I wonder, and why does he cling so tightly to his alibi? I frowned, puzzled. He seemed rattled, didn't he? Almost as if he expected you to catch him out. Poirot nodded. Précisément. There is more to Monsieur Thornton than meets the eye. Miss Eleanor came next, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of sympathy for her. She was a delicate creature, her pale face framed by a simple shawl, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she sat down. She clasped her hands so tightly her knuckles whitened. Mademoiselle Eleanor, Poirot said, his voice soft as a caress. You knew Monsieur Arthur, did you not? She nodded, her voice barely audible. Yes, long ago we were acquainted. Acquainted, or perhaps more, Poirot prompted gently. There are whispers that you and Monsieur Arthur were once close, perhaps even engaged. Her breath hitched, and she looked away, her voice trembling. Yes, we were engaged, but it ended badly. He left me, and I've tried to forget. And yet his return must have stirred old feelings, Poirot said, his tone coaxing. "Did you speak with him during his visit? Did he say anything that might explain his sudden appearance?" She shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, we barely spoke. He looked at me but said nothing. I couldn't bear it, so I kept to myself." "And your presence here at Ivy Manor, why were you invited this weekend?" She hesitated, her voice breaking. "Charles is an old family friend. He thought a change of scenery might do me good, after everything." Poirot's eyes softened, but his mind was clearly at work. "And on the night of the murder, you were in your room. Did you hear anything unusual, mademoiselle?" Her hands trembled as she brushed at her tears. "I spent a bit of time in the drawing-room with Lady Penelope. Then I went to my room. I only heard the wind, and perhaps a muffled sound, like something heavy falling. But I thought nothing of it." "Nothing else? No voices? No footsteps?" She shook her head. "I was lost in my own thoughts, Mr. Poirot. I paid little attention to the sounds of the house." Poirot nodded, his expression kind but probing. "Thank you, mademoiselle. You have been most helpful." As she fled the room, I turned to Poirot, my heart heavy. "Poor girl. She's in a state. Do you think her past with Arthur could be connected to his murder?" Poirot's brow furrowed. "A secret of the heart, Hastings. It may be a motive or it may be a distraction. We must tread carefully." Colonel Hargreaves marched in next, his military bearing as stiff as ever. He filled the room with his presence, his voice booming even in the small space. "Billiards, that's where I was. Played a few rounds alone. No one else up for a game. More's the pity." Poirot's eyes twinkled faintly. "And tell me, Colonel, what brought you to Ivy Manor this weekend? You are an old friend of the family, I presume?" Hargreaves puffed out his chest. "Indeed. Charles invited me for a spot of shooting, though the weather's been against us." "And your relationship with Monsieur Arthur? Did you know him well?" The Colonel's face darkened. "Knew of him, more like. Always causing trouble, that one. Never understood why Charles put up with him." "And on the night of the murder, you were in the billiard room, alone, you say?" Hargreaves nodded. "Yes, pottering about. No one else was interested in a game, so I played a few rounds by myself." "And you heard nothing unusual? No sounds from the library, perhaps?" Hargreaves snorted. "The house creaks like an old ship, but that's all. Though now you mention it, there was a dull thud around midnight. Thought it was the house settling." Poirot's gaze sharpened. "A thud, you say? Could it have been a gunshot?" The Colonel blinked, his bluster faltering. "Well, I suppose it could have been, but I didn't think anything of it at the time." "And you didn't investigate?" Hargreaves shook his head. "No, didn't seem worth it. Old houses make all sorts of noises." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Colonel. That will be all for now." As Hargreaves strode out, I chuckled. He's a character, isn't he? All bluster and brandy. Poirot smiled faintly. "Yes, but beneath the bluster there is evasion. We must not dismiss him yet." Lady Penelope swept in with an air of eager anticipation, her eyes bright with the thrill of gossip. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, what a dreadful business! Arthur was a wild one, you know. Debts, scandals, the lot. Why, I heard he once ran off with a married woman from Bath, and then there was that business with the racehorses." Poirot raised a hand, his voice courteous but firm. "Madame, if you please, tell me, what brought you to Ivy Manor this weekend? You are a friend of the family, I take it." She blinked, then smiled. "Oh, yes, I've known Charles for years. We move in the same circles, you see. He invited me for a quiet weekend in the country, though it's turned out to be anything but quiet." "And your relationship with Monsieur Arthur? Did you know him well?" Her smile faltered. Not well, no. He was always a bit of a rogue, charming but dangerous. I kept my distance. And on the night of the murder, you were in the drawing room with Miss Eleanor. Did you notice anything unusual about her behavior? Lady Penelope's eyes widened. Well, she was very quiet, even for her, kept staring out the window, lost in thought. I tried to engage her in conversation, but she wasn't interested. And later, when you went to bed, you heard footsteps and a muffled bang. Could you describe the footsteps? She thought for a moment. Light, quick steps, like someone in a hurry, and the bang, it was like a door slamming, but muffled, as if it came from far away. And you didn't investigate? She laughed, a trilling sound. Good heavens, no. I'm not one to go poking about in the dark. I stayed put, though I did hear a door creak later. Might have been the wind again. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Most illuminating, madame. You may go. As she departed, I grinned. She's a talker, isn't she? Could spin a yarn all day. Poirot's lips quirked. Indeed, Hastings. But amidst the chatter, there are crumbs of truth. The servants came last, and I found myself oddly curious about their accounts. Jenkins, the butler, was still pale from the morning shock. "I heard footsteps, sir," he said, his voice shaky. "After midnight, I reckon, coming from the east wing. I thought it was the house settling, but now I'm not so sure." Poirot leaned forward. "Monsieur Jenkins, you have served the Montague family for many years, have you not?" Jenkins nodded. "Yes, sir, for at least 10 years now." "And in that time have you ever witnessed any tensions between Monsieur Charles and Monsieur Arthur?" Jenkins hesitated. "Well, sir, they've always had their differences. Monsieur Arthur was always the wild one, while Monsieur Charles was more reserved. But I never thought it would come to this." "And on the night of the murder you heard footsteps. Could you describe them?" Jenkins fidgeted, his hands twisting his apron. "Soft, like someone trying not to be heard. A slow tread, then a pause. I was half asleep in my quarters, so I didn't think much of it till now." "And did you see anyone in the East Wing that night?" Jenkins shook his head. "No, sir. I stayed in my room." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Monsieur Jenkins. You may go." Molly, the maid, spoke next, her eyes sharp despite her nerves. "I saw Mr. Thornton near the library earlier that evening, before 10, I think. He looked flustered, pacing a bit, but I didn't ask why." Poirot's gaze flicked to me, then back to her. "Mademoiselle Molly, you have a keen eye. Tell me, what is your impression of the guests? Have you noticed anything unusual in their behavior?" Molly hesitated. "Well, sir, Miss Eleanor seems very sad, and Lady Penelope is always asking questions. The Colonel, he keeps to himself mostly, and Mr. Thornton, well, he's always watching Monsieur Charles like he's worried about something. And on the night of the murder, you heard a faint pop or a muffled thud. Could you describe it more precisely?" She nodded. "It was like a cork popping, but softer, and then a thump, like something heavy hitting the floor. I thought it was just the house, but now—" "Now you think it might have been something more," Poirot finished. "Thank you, Mademoiselle Molly. You have been most helpful." With the interviews concluded, Poirot led me back to the library, his mind clearly still churning over the details we'd gathered. Inspector Japp was there, overseeing the constables as they continued their search for the missing gun. But Poirot's attention was elsewhere. His sharp eyes roamed the room, taking in every detail, until they settled on the bookshelves lining the walls. He paused, his gaze fixed on a section where one book jutted out ever so slightly, its spine misaligned with the rest. It was a small discrepancy, but to Poirot, It was like a beacon. He approached the shelf slowly, his fingers trailing lightly over the spines of the books as if sensing their secrets. "Books, Hastings," he murmured. "They are the silent witnesses in this room. And sometimes they hold more than just words." He stopped at the misaligned book, a weathered copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles. With a deliberate motion, he reached out and pulled it from the shelf. As he did, a folded piece of paper slipped from between the pages, drifting to the floor like a leaf in autumn. Poirot bent to retrieve it, his fingers unfolding the letter with the utmost care. He studied it for a moment, his eyes gleaming with that familiar spark of discovery. "Ah, Hastings," he murmured. "What have we here?" He read aloud, "Charles, you have taken what wasn't yours. I will reclaim it or expose you. Signed, Arthur." I felt a jolt of excitement. "A motive!" I exclaimed, "hidden cleverly." Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Indeed, mon ami. Arthur must have concealed this here during his visit, a threat tucked away for Charles to find, or for us to uncover. It speaks of a deep-seated grievance, one that may have driven someone to desperate measures." Japp joined us, his report brisk. "No gun yet, but that footprint matches boots from the servants' quarters." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "The boots are a clue, Japp, but it is this letter hidden so shrewdly that sings to me. It reveals the heart of the matter, motives, not mud. This letter, it is the key to understanding why Arthur returned and why someone wished him silenced." He folded the letter carefully, slipping it into his pocket. "We must consider what this taking refers to. A theft, perhaps, or something more personal. It is clear that Arthur believed Charles had wronged him, and he was determined to set things right, or to exact revenge." I watched as Poirot's mind worked, piecing together the puzzle. The letter was a significant find, but I knew it was only one piece of a much larger picture. Still, it was a start, and with Poirot on the case, I had no doubt that the truth would soon come to light. That night, in our room, Poirot sat sketching a timeline in his notebook, his pencil moving with that meticulous care I so admired. "The pieces align, Hastings," he murmured. "It is the mind, not the mud, that will solve this." I nodded, my thoughts awhirl. "You've got something, haven't you?" He smiled, enigmatic as ever. "Patience, mon ami. The little grey cells, they are busy indeed." Chapter 5. Secrets Unravel. The morning mist lingered over Ivy Manor like a persistent guest, its tendrils curling around the ivy-clad walls and softening the edges of the world beyond. Within the library, where the grim shadow of Arthur Montague's death still hung, Hercule Poirot and I stood poised to unravel yet another thread of this tangled mystery. The air was cool and faintly musty, the scent of old leather and parchment mingling with a sharper note, the metallic tang of blood, now dried upon the rug. Poirot's sharp eyes roamed the room, his gaze settling on the grand fireplace, its ashes undisturbed since the night of the murder. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured, "the fireplace. It is cold, yet there is a faint draught. Most curious, n'est-ce pas?" He stepped closer, his fingers brushing the mantelpiece with a delicacy that belied his intent. He paused, then knelt, peering into the hearth. "Ah," he exclaimed softly, "there is something here. A lever, perhaps." With a deft motion, he pressed a hidden catch, and a section of the wall beside the fireplace swung open, revealing a narrow passage cloaked in shadow. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed, stepping closer. "A secret passage!" Poirot's moustache twitched with satisfaction. "Précisément, mon ami. A passage such as this, it is the perfect accomplice to a crime. Let us see where it leads." We ventured into the gloom, the air growing damp and chill as we descended. The walls were rough-hewn stone, slick with moisture. and the floor uneven beneath our feet. Poirot's torch cast a thin beam ahead, illuminating cobwebs that hung like gossamer curtains. The passage twisted downward, its confines pressing close, until at last it widened, and we emerged near the lake's edge. The fog had thinned, revealing the still waters and the woods beyond, their branches skeletal against the grey sky. Poirot knelt, his keen gaze sweeping the muddy ground. "Footprints," he announced, pointing to fresh impressions leading away from the manor. "Recent and deliberate. The killer, they used this passage to escape, staging the scene to confound us." "But why not flee outright?" I asked, my mind racing. "Why go to such lengths?" Poirot rose, brushing his hands with a grimace of distaste. "To deceive, Hastings." The locked window, the missing gun, it is all a masquerade designed to suggest an outsider or a suicide. But the little grey cells, they see through such tricks. We retraced our steps, emerging once more into the library. Poirot closed the hidden door with care, ensuring it betrayed no sign of our discovery. Back within the library's oak-panelled embrace, Poirot drew the letter from his pocket and unfolded it upon the desk. His brow furrowed as he studied the scrawled words, his fingers tracing the ink as though it might yield its secrets through touch alone. "Listen, Hastings," he said, reading aloud with deliberate clarity. "Charles, you have taken what wasn't yours. I will reclaim it, or expose you. Signed, Arthur." He looked up, his green eyes sharp as cut glass. "This is no idle threat, mon ami. It speaks of a grievance deep and festering. Arthur believed Charles had wronged him, perhaps in matters of inheritance or family honour." I frowned, leaning closer. "But Charles has been master here for years. How could Arthur claim such a thing?" Poirot nodded, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Oui. And yet what if the taking refers to something more than mere property? A betrayal, perhaps, or a secret that Charles guards fiercely. We must consider all possibilities, financial disputes, personal vendettas, or even questions of legitimacy within the Montague line." "Legitimacy?" I echoed, my curiosity piqued. "You mean there might be doubts about Charles's right to the estate?" "It is one hypothesis among many," Poirot replied, folding the letter with precision. "The Montague lineage, there may be records, documents that will illuminate this shadow. But we must tread carefully, Hastings. The truth, it is a delicate thing." That afternoon, as I wandered the manor's corridors, seeking respite from the oppressive air, I chanced upon Reginald Thornton and Miss Eleanor in the conservatory. Their voices were low, but the tension between them was palpable. Reginald's hand hovered near her shoulder, as if to comfort or constrain, while Miss Eleanor's gaze darted away, her expression a storm of unspoken emotions. I lingered by the doorway, reluctant to intrude, yet compelled to watch, until Reginald's voice rose sharply. "You mustn't speak of it, Eleanor. Not to anyone." She pulled away, her voice trembling. "But I can't keep silent forever. It's too much to bear." Their exchange ended abruptly, as Reginald noticed my presence, his face hardening. He strode past me without a word, leaving Miss Eleanor to compose herself in the shadowed room. I resolved to inform Poirot. This encounter, however cryptic, bore the weight of significance. That same afternoon, as the fog thickened once more, Inspector Japp arrived at the manor, his face alight with triumph. "We've got it, Poirot," he declared, holding aloft a rusted revolver. "Found it in the lake. One of my lads spotted it in the mud. Recently fired, I'd wager." Poirot rose from his chair, his interest piqued. "Excellent work, Inspector. And where precisely was it discovered?" "Near the passage's exit," Japp replied, puffing out his chest. "Half buried, but the caliber matches the bullet in Arthur's head." Poirot examined the weapon, his fingers deft despite its tarnished state. "It fits, yes," he mused. "The killer, they tossed it here after fleeing through the passage. But tell me, Jap, does this alone reveal the who or the why?" Jap sighed, his enthusiasm dimming. "You and your whys, Poirot. I say it's the how that matters. Here's your gun, plain as day." Poirot smiled thinly. "The how is but a servant to the why, mon ami. This revolver, it is a tool, its master's motive. That is what we must seek." That evening, as the manor settled into an uneasy quiet, Poirot summoned me to his room. He paced before the window, his hands clasped behind his back, his small frame silhouetted against the fogged glass. "Hastings," he said, turning to face me, "the threads, they begin to weave together. The passage, the letter, the revolver, all point to a crime most calculated. But the heart of it lies with Charles Montague and the secret he guards." I settled into a chair. My curiosity piqued. "The secret? You mean the taking mentioned in the letter?" "Précisément," Poirot replied, his eyes narrowing. "Arthur believed Charles had wronged him deeply, taking what wasn't yours. It could be inheritance, yes, but perhaps something more profound. A betrayal of trust, a theft of honor, or even a question of legitimacy within the Montague line." I frowned, considering. "Legitimacy? You think there's doubt about Charles's right to the estate?" "It is one possibility among many," Poirot said, his tone measured. "The letter is vague, but its passion is clear. Arthur felt robbed of something vital, and his return threatened to expose a truth Charles has kept hidden. We must probe the past, Hastings. Seek out records, perhaps even the family's legal documents. The truth, it hides in the details." I nodded, though uncertainty lingered. But the guests, the servants, they've known Charles for years. If there was something amiss, wouldn't they have noticed? "Ah, but have they truly known him?" Poirot countered. "Or have they known the man he presents to the world? People see what they expect to see, Hastings. A clever deception, sustained over time, can become indistinguishable from reality. We must look beyond the surface." The next morning, as the household gathered for breakfast, a palpable tension gripped the room. Charles rose abruptly, his face flushed with resolve. "I've had enough of this," he declared, his voice unsteady. "I'm leaving for London this morning. Urgent business demands my attention." Poirot, seated at the table, exchanged a glance with Jap, who stepped forward with a gruff nod. "Afraid not, Mr. Montague," Jap said, his tone firm. "No one leaves Ivy Manor until this case is cracked." Charles' eyes widened, his hands clenching. "This is outrageous. I've matters to attend to. You can't keep me here like a prisoner." Poirot rose, his voice calm yet unyielding. "Monsieur, your departure now would cast a shadow of suspicion upon you. It is in your interest, as well as ours, that you remain until the truth is revealed." Charles glared, his resolve wavering. "You think I had something to do with Arthur's death? That's preposterous." "I think only that the truth must be allowed to emerge," Poirot replied, his gaze steady. "To flee now would be to invite doubt. Stay, and let us clear your name, if indeed it can be cleared." Charles hesitated, then sank back into his chair, his defiance crumbling. "Very well," he muttered, "but I expect this to be resolved swiftly." Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "It shall be, monsieur. The net tightens, and soon we shall see." As evening fell, I found Poirot by the lake, the fog lifting to reveal its glassy surface. He stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the water, a solitary figure against the fading light. "The truth is near, mon ami," he said softly, his voice carrying a quiet certainty. "Very near indeed." I joined him, the stillness of the scene belying the storm I knew was yet to come. Chapter 6. The Drawing-Room Revelation. The drawing-room of Ivy Manor stood as a testament to a grandeur now tinged with unease, its velvet sofas and shimmering chandelier bathed in the soft glow of late afternoon. Yet beneath this veneer of elegance, a tension simmered, as oppressive as the fog that had cloaked the estate for days. Hercule Poirot had summoned the household, guests and servants alike, to this opulent chamber, and they had come, their faces etched with apprehension and curiosity. Colonel Hargreaves occupied a high-backed chair, his ruddy cheeks flushed with a mixture of indignation and unease. Lady Penelope sat poised, her fingers clutching her pearls as her eyes darted about. Miss Eleanor, pale and silent, gazed into the fire with an air of quiet despair. Charles Montague lingered near the window, his lean frame taut, while Reginald Thornton hovered at his side, his nervous tics more pronounced than ever. Jenkins and Molly stood by the door, their postures rigid, as if braced for some unseen blow. Inspector Japp guarded the exit, his arms crossed, and his expression a blend of skepticism and grudging trust, while I, Captain Hastings, sat eagerly near Poirot, my notebook open upon my knee. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small, neat figure a beacon of calm amid the storm. In his hand he held a delicate cup of tisane, its herbal fragrance a faint counterpoint to the charged atmosphere. He took a sip, then placed the cup upon the mantel with a gesture of deliberate precision. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and measured, "we are gathered here to bring light to a darkness that has fallen upon this house, the murder of Monsieur Arthur Montague. But first, we must untangle the threads of deception that have woven this tragic tapestry." He paused, his green eyes sweeping the room, meeting each gaze with a quiet intensity that seemed to pierce through pretense. "It began, as you know, with a theft. A silver cigarette case reported missing by Monsieur Charles Montague. A trifling matter, or so it appeared. Yet, as I have often said, mon ami Hastings, it is the smallest detail that reveals the greatest truth. This theft, it was no mere misplacement, it was a pretext, devised by Monsieur Charles to summon me to Ivy Manor." Charles shifted, his fingers tightening on the window frame. "A pretext?" he said, his voice sharp with unease. "I assure you, Poirot, it was a genuine loss." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him with a gentle yet firm gesture. "Non, monsieur. You feared the return of your brother Arthur, did you not? His unexpected arrival confirmed your dread, for he carried with him a truth you wished to keep buried. You hoped that Hercule Poirot's presence might deter him, or, failing that, shield you from the consequences of his revelations." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Penelope leaned forward, her voice a breathy whisper. "Revelations? Oh, Mr. Poirot, do tell. What secrets did Arthur bring?" Poirot's gaze turned to her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Patience, madame. All shall be made clear." He stepped away from the fireplace, his movements deliberate, as though tracing the very path of the crime. "Let us reconstruct that fateful night. Arthur Montague returned to Ivy Manor under cover of darkness, entering not through the front door but via the secret passage we discovered in the library, a passage known to few, yet used with purpose. He confronted the murderer, and their argument reached its deadly crescendo. A shot was fired, muffled by a cushion to cloak the sound, and Arthur fell, lifeless, in that very room. The killer then fled through the passage, tossing the revolver into the lake to obscure the deed. Japp grunted from his post by the door, his tone gruff but intrigued. "That's the how of it, Poirot. Neatly done, I'll grant you. The gun in the lake, the passage. It fits. But who pulled the trigger? That's what we're all waiting to hear." Poirot inclined his head, his expression serene yet resolute. Indeed, Inspector. But to name the killer, we must first uncover the why, the motive that drove this desperate act. He drew from his pocket the letter we had found hidden in the library, unfolding it with care. This, mes amis, is the key. It reads, "Charles, you have taken what wasn't yours. I will reclaim it, or expose you." Signed by Arthur Montague. He held the letter aloft, his voice rising with a quiet fervour. What did Arthur mean by this? What had been taken? An inheritance, one might suppose, but no, it is more profound than that. He turned to Charles, his gaze piercing as a blade. "Monsieur, you are not the true Charles Montague, are you? You are an impostor, a man who assumed the identity of the real Charles Montague many years ago, after he vanished under circumstances most mysterious." A gasp echoed through the room, sharp and collective. Charles' face drained of colour, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as though to anchor himself against the tide of Poirot's words. That's absurd," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I am Charles Montague. I've lived here, managed this estate." "Non, monsieur," Poirot interrupted, his tone unyielding yet tinged with pity. "The real Charles Montague disappeared, and you stepped into his shoes, crafting a masquerade so convincing that even those closest to you were deceived. But Arthur, the true heir, uncovered your fraud. He returned to reclaim his birthright, or to expose you to the world. And that, monsieur, is why he had to die." Poirot paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle upon the room. "But who, you ask, would kill to protect such a secret? Let us consider each of you in turn, for in a crime of this nature all must be suspect until proven otherwise." He turned first to Miss Eleanor, her pale face lifting to meet his gaze. "Mademoiselle Eleanor, your past with Arthur was fraught with emotion. You were once engaged, and his return stirred old wounds. One might think you harbored resentment, perhaps even a desire for revenge. But no, your alibi is sound. You were in your room, as confirmed by Lady Penelope, who heard your restless pacing through the night. Moreover, you lacked the knowledge of the passage, a secret not shared with you. The motive of the heart, it is strong, but here it does not lead to murder." Miss Eleanor's shoulders slumped in relief, though her eyes remained shadowed with grief. Poirot's gaze shifted to Colonel Hargreaves, who straightened in his chair, his moustache bristling. "Colonel, your bluster and vague timeline raised my suspicions. A man of your military background might have the nerve to commit such an act. Yet your movements were accounted for. Jenkins saw you in the billiard room, and your physical limitations, the old war wound that hinders your gait, would have made navigating the passage's steep steps a near impossibility. No, Colonel, you did not kill Arthur Montague." Hargreaves huffed, a mixture of relief and indignation crossing his features. "Well, of course not. Absurd to think otherwise." Next, Poirot turned to Lady Penelope, who clutched her pearls tighter. "Madame, your penchant for gossip and shifting stories cast a shadow of doubt. You spoke of footsteps and muffled bangs, yet your accounts were inconsistent. But upon closer scrutiny, it is clear you were in the drawing-room with Miss Eleanor in the evening, and then in your room. Moreover, your motive, curiosity perhaps, but not murder. You sought scandal, not violence." Lady Penelope's laugh was nervous, her relief palpable. "Oh, Mr. Poirot, you do have a way of making one's heart race." Poirot's attention moved to the servants. "Jenkins, your loyalty to the household is commendable, but your jittery demeanour and presence in the servants' hall place you far from the library. You heard the footsteps, yes, but you did not venture out. And Mademoiselle Molly, your sharp eyes noted much, but your duties kept you in the dining hall cleaning. Neither of you had the opportunity nor the motive to commit this crime." Jenkins and Molly exchanged glances, their postures relaxing ever so slightly. "And so," Poirot continued, his voice taking on a sharper edge, "we come to the one whose loyalty surpasses reason, whose actions betray a desperate need to protect a secret not his own." Reginald Thornton leapt to his feet, his thin frame trembling with indignation. "This is madness, Poirot. Charles is my cousin. I've known him since we were boys. How dare you accuse him of such a thing?" Poirot turned to him, his eyes narrowing. "Ah, Monsieur Thornton, you claim a bond of childhood, yet the truth is more tangled, is it not? You knew the real Charles Montague, but this man, this impostor, he is not that boy you grew up with. And yet you protect him fiercely. Why? The little grey cells, they have pondered this, and the answer lies not in your past with the real Charles, but in a debt you owe to this false one." Reginald's face paled, his hands clenching. "A debt? What nonsense!" "No, it is not nonsense," Poirot interjected, his voice calm yet relentless. "Years ago, when you were a man lost, perhaps in ruin, perhaps in peril, this impostor came to you. He saved you, did he not? A moment of crisis, a debt unpaid, a life spared, a secret kept. He pulled you from the abyss, and in return you pledged your loyalty. When he assumed the mantle of Charles Montague, you stood by him, not because you believed him to be your cousin, but because he had given you a second chance, a new life tied to his masquerade." Reginald's breath hitched, his eyes darting to the impostor Charles. You can't possibly know that." "Mais oui, I can," Poirot said, stepping closer. "The clues, they whisper the truth. A letter in your quarters, vague but telling, hinting at a past favour. Your unwavering defence of this Charles, despite the inconsistencies a childhood friend should have seen. Your nervous tics, betraying a man burdened by more than mere duty. You knew he was not the true Charles, yet you guarded his secret, not for love of the real Montague, but for the man who rescued you." He paused, then turned to address a moment that had lingered in my own mind. "And then, mes amis, there was the curious incident in the conservatory, overheard by mon ami Hastings. Monsieur Thornton urged Mademoiselle Eleanor to remain silent, warning her not to speak of it to anyone. What was this it? I asked myself. A secret so dire it required such a stern admonition. It was, of course, the truth of Charles's identity, a truth that Mademoiselle Eleanor, through her past with Arthur, had begun to suspect. Her engagement to Arthur gave her insight into the Montague family, and perhaps she noticed discrepancies in this Charles's behaviour or tales over the years. Reginald, aware of her suspicions, feared she might expose the imposture, and thus sought to silence her, not with violence, but with desperate pleas. Miss Eleanor's head snapped up, her eyes wide with recognition, though she said nothing. Reginald's shoulders slumped further, his silence an admission of its own. He addressed the room once more, his voice steady as he wove the tale to its climax. The letter, hidden in the library, spoke of a theft not merely of wealth, but of identity. The secret passage, used to stage the scene and dispose of the gun, revealed a mind both cunning and desperate, and the revolver, recovered from the lake by Inspector Japp's diligent men, confirmed the path of the killer's flight. Japp nodded, his skepticism giving way to a grudging respect. Aye, the gun's a match, found right where the passage lets out. But you're saying Thornton here's our man? Poirot's gaze settled upon Reginald, who flinched as though struck. Oui, Inspector. Monsieur Reginald Thornton, whose loyalty to the impostor surpasses reason. Observe his nervous tics, his presence near the library on the night of the murder, as noted by Mademoiselle Molly. His fierce defence of his cousin, all speak of a man with much to conceal. Reginald's hands clenched, his voice rising in a desperate protest. I was protecting Charles, yes, but I didn't kill Arthur. I swear it on my life. Poirot stepped closer, his voice low and insistent. cutting through the man's denials like a surgeon's blade. "But you did, monsieur. You shot Arthur to silence him, to preserve the secret you have guarded since the imposture began. You knew of the passage. Perhaps you learned it in your youth, a relic of Ivy Manor's secrets. On that night, you followed Arthur into the library, and when he pressed his claim, you acted. You used the cushion to muffle the shot, then fled through the passage, planting false clues to mislead us. But the little grey cells, they see beyond such ruses." Reginald's face crumpled, his resolve shattering like glass. I had no choice," he whispered, his voice breaking as tears welled in his eyes. "Arthur would have ruined it all. This Charles, he saved me when no one else would. Years ago I'd have been dead or worse without him. I owed him everything, my life, my place here. Arthur's return threatened to tear it down, to expose the lie and leave me with nothing. I couldn't let that happen, not after what he'd done for me." Charles rose unsteadily, his voice a choked plea. "Reginald, no. You didn't do this for me." "I did." Reginald sobbed, collapsing into a chair, his hands covering his face. "I've kept your secret since the beginning, since you took the name. I couldn't let Arthur destroy it." A stunned silence fell, heavy and profound. Japp stepped forward, his tone firm yet not unkind. "Reginald Thornton, you're under arrest for the murder of Arthur Montague. Come along now." As Japp led Reginald from the room, Charles sank back into his seat, his head in his hands. "It's true," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I'm not Charles Montague. The real Charles vanished years ago. Lost, I thought, forever. I took his place, built this life. But I never wanted anyone to die." Poirot adjusted his tie with a flourish, his expression one of serene satisfaction. "The truth, it emerges as it must, monsieur, and with it, order is restored." The household sat in a daze, the weight of the revelation pressing upon them like a physical force. Outside, the fog had at last begun to lift, the sun casting a tentative light across the manor's grounds, as if to signal the end of a long and shadowed chapter. Chapter 7. Order Restored. The storm that had swept through Ivy Manor had passed, leaving in its wake a stillness that seemed almost reverent. Reginald Thornton, his narrow shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his confession, was led away in handcuffs by Inspector Japp and his constables, the clink of metal a sombre note against the manor's hushed corridors. Charles Montague, or the man who had borne that name, stood apart. His once confident demeanor shattered as the authorities questioned him, his imposture laid bare for all to see. The guests, their roles in this grim drama concluded, prepared to depart, their movements a quiet counterpoint to the revelations that had shaken the house to its foundations. Colonel Hargreaves packed his cases with a grumble, his booming voice subdued to a mutter. "Deuced inconvenient business," he said, though the tremor in his hands betrayed a deeper disquiet. Lady Penelope, ever loquacious, filled the air with nervous chatter as she gathered her belongings, her gossip now tinged with a wary edge. "To think, an impostor among us, and murder to boot. I shall have much to tell at the next soirée." Miss Eleanor slipped away in silence, her face a pale mask of sorrow, her footsteps soft upon the gravel as she vanished into the lifting fog. Poirot and I sought refuge in the garden, the crisp autumn air a balm after the stifling tension within. The mist had begun to dissipate, revealing the manor's grounds in gentle clarity, the ivy-clad walls, the barren trees, the lake now glinting faintly under a tentative sun. We settled upon a stone bench, and Poirot drew forth his ever-present tisane, sipping it with a contemplative air as his sharp eyes roamed the scene. "Ah, Hastings," he said at length, his voice soft yet resonant. "It is in such moments that one sees the beauty of order restored. The truth, it emerges from the chaos, does it not? And yet, what a price is paid for its unveiling. I nodded, my pen scratching across the pages of my notebook as I recorded the final threads of the case. You've done it again, Poirot. The way you saw through it all, it's nothing short of extraordinary. Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile, though his gaze remained distant. It is not the seeing alone, mon ami, but the understanding. The little grey cells, they discern the patterns of the human soul. Consider Reginald. His loyalty, it was a noble thing, twisted into a weapon by circumstance. And Charles, his fear of exposure, it drove him to summon me, yet he could not foresee the tempest it would unleash. I paused in my writing, struck by his insight. Reginald's devotion. It was almost tragic, wasn't it? To kill for a man who wasn't even who he claimed to be. Précisément, Poirot replied, setting his cup aside with a delicate clink. Loyalty, it is a double-edged blade. It binds men together, yet when it blinds them to justice, it becomes a peril. Reginald saw in this false Charles a saviour, a debt to be repaid at any cost. Arthur's return threatened that bond, and so he acted, not for hate, but for a love misplaced. And you pieced it together from those psychological clues, I said, my admiration swelling. His nervous tics, Charles's evasiveness, it's astonishing how you read them. Poirot waved a hand, a gesture of modest dismissal. It is but the application of method, Hastings. The passage, the letter, the revolver, these were mere tools. It was the mind behind them that spoke loudest. Reginald's agitation, Charles's dread. They were the keys to the locked room of this mystery. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at me. But Poirot, why did Arthur tolerate the impostor for so long? If he knew Charles was a fraud, why not expose him sooner? Poirot's eyes gleamed with understanding. Ah, mon ami, that is the question of the heart. Arthur, he was a man of many flaws, debts, scandals, a life lived on the edge. The impostor, he provided Arthur with a comfortable existence, perhaps an allowance to keep him at bay. And Arthur, he feared the chaos that exposure would bring, not just to himself, but to the estate, to the family name. It was a delicate balance, one that held until Arthur's own circumstances changed, compelling him to act. So it was a matter of convenience, I ventured. Convenience, yes, but also of fear, Poirot replied. Arthur knew that to unmask the impostor would be to invite ruin upon himself. The impostor had woven himself into the fabric of Ivy Manor, and to tear him out would be to unravel all. It was only when Arthur felt he had no other choice, perhaps a debt too great, a threat too pressing, that he returned to reclaim what was his. I closed my notebook, the tale complete. You're a marvel, Poirot, truly. After all this, what say you to a holiday? Somewhere warm, perhaps, with no mysteries to trouble us? Poirot's smile widened, a twinkle in his eye, though his gaze drifted to the horizon. A tempting notion, mon ami, but the world, it is never short of puzzles. There will always be another, waiting to challenge the little grey cells. For now, though, let us savour this moment of peace. As we rose to depart, Ivy Manor stood silent behind us, its secrets exposed, its grandeur softened by the light of truth. The lake shimmered like a polished mirror, reflecting the sky's tentative blue, and Poirot hummed a faint tune, a melody of contentment, I thought, his step light with the satisfaction of justice served. We left the manor behind, the fog of deceit lifted at last, ready for whatever lay ahead. As the fog lifts from Ivy Manor, Hercule Poirot stands triumphant, his little grey cells having pierced through a labyrinth of lies and loyalty. The truth is revealed. Charles Montague was an impostor, a man who had assumed the identity of the true heir years ago after the real Charles vanished. His loyal secretary, Reginald Thornton, driven by a debt of gratitude from a past rescue, murdered Arthur Montague to protect the secret that bound them. Poirot's relentless pursuit of order unraveled the deception, exposing the killer and the fraud at the heart of the manor through clues like a hidden letter, a secret passage, and a revolver cast into the lake. Yet, as justice prevails, the story leaves us with a haunting reflection on the price of loyalty and the shadows cast by hidden truths. We hope this tale has captivated you. Did you suspect Thornton's devotion concealed a darker motive? Share your thoughts below. If Hercule Poirot and the mystery of the Ivy Manor has enthralled you, please like this episode and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for more mysteries. Support our storytelling journey either by becoming a member or by tipping us with a super thanks available under this video or via our Buy Me a Coffee page, link in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until our next nocturnal adventure, may your nights brim with curiosity and your days with clarity.